Welcome on to the next edition of the Faster Beyond 50 podcast. My name is Brad Nuttles. We've got the Coach Lindsey Parry with us once again. And today we are doing a deep dive into heart rate variability and recovery for runners over 50. Linz, nice to catch up once again. It's quite weird getting this Saturday vibe thing right because I'm running a marathon tomorrow. I'm still on the fence whether I'm running or not, but I've picked up my number. We'll see how I feel this afternoon, and then we'll make a call.
Yeah, so at least you had a couple of runs without pain. Yeah, I guess you've just kind of got to think about the big picture and make the right decision for next year, not for tomorrow.
Yeah, I guess it also depends on how much of a sufferfest I enjoy. I mean, I like suffering at the best of times, but marathons are long. Like it's like not to be like it's not trivial. It's not like I can go and suffer for a 10K. Like 42K is 26 miles is a hell of a long time to suffer for.
Yeah, 100%. And I actually wish that they hadn't called half marathons because I've seen a couple of jokes in the running into this exact marathon where people have been tearing into half marathon. Like who thinks? And I'm like, yeah, it's just because of the name. I wish they just called it a 21. Yeah, then we wouldn't have to feel so much pressure to run so many marathons.
Exactly. Anyway, let's talk heart rate variability and particularly the use of which for recovery in older athletes. Before we dive into the recovery aspect, let's just simplify what HRV is. What is heart rate variability actually?
So, Brad, it is the difference in time between beats. Okay, so we don't, even though when we take our heart rate, as we've always traditionally done, resting heart rate, you count each beat, and we count that over 60 seconds. And if you counted that 60 seconds every 2 or 3 minutes, and you did that over a period of time, that would be out by maybe one beat. But if you're 42, you'll be 42. Maybe you'll be 41 every now and then, but your heart rate will be your heart rate. But even though you have the same number of heartbeats in that 60 seconds, there is variation in the gaps between the heartbeats, and it is minute variation. So it is measured in milliseconds. Okay, so just to give you an idea, and anybody who's looked at HRV, typical values are anywhere between the 20s and the 50s. So we're talking 20 to 50 milliseconds. So basically nothing. But those differences tell us what condition our nervous system is. This is the important bit about the heart rate variability, is that it will tell you whether your excitatory or inhibitory nervous system is the dominant force at that moment in time. So smaller gaps, slower heart rate or lower heart rate variability tell you that you've got an inhibitory excitement. And if you've got bigger gap, no, actually now I better double check myself there. But yeah, sorry, higher numbers are better, so that shows better balance, and lower numbers show that you're under stress.
So, Lindsey, of late, the last few years, there's been this massive increase in people sort of tracking heart rate variability, but also using it as a metric. What has driven this sort of, I don't want to say craze because it's not a craze, but like the popularity of using HRV, I should say.
So it's quite simply, it's more sensitive than just taking heart rate. And so, when you are under stress, particularly when you are sleeping, and our ability to track during sleeping. So, when heart rate variability was first discovered, it could only be measured in the lab. Then you could measure it if you were wearing a strap, but it's not comfortable to sleep with a strap. Now you can wear rings or watches, and these are all relatively accurate. There are differences between devices, which always makes you worry about the reliability and validity. So, until three watches all measure a very similar thing, I always go like, okay, is there enough reliability in my unit that I can at least get usable data? Um, so yeah, I mean, I still feel like at the moment there are probably two or three products that are market leaders in that, and the sports watches are probably doing a pretty good job. And I certainly feel like I can use my device, and it will give me usable information. But yeah, that's literally why it's become so popular. It's more sensitive, so you get a more advanced warning than you do if you just simply use heart rate.
Yeah, and it's probably also more the newer devices. More of them are measuring HRV, whereas in the past as well, it might not have been. It might have been a metric that you could track in a lab, but the sort of entry level devices weren't tracking them, whereas now they almost are. And then, Lindsey, is HRV very similar to resting heart rate in the sense that the number itself isn't the number? Like it's not so much like you obviously like you want a higher heart rate variability, but it's not so much the absolute value of that number more than a trend, so you can use it with your training, much like you do with resting heart rate, that it doesn't, you're not striving for a specific number.
100%. And again, that's even more important because, as I said, there's a little bit of inter-device variability. So, in my previous watch, I had really high numbers. Now, I mean, if I just had to look at absolute numbers, I think that since I got the new watch, I've got a problem. But now that I've had the watch for a couple of months, I can track the things over time, and I just know that it measures differently. Whereas with my Polar, 52 was a good number. With my Sunto, 43 is a good number. So it's just really, and look, the fact that it's in theory measuring milliseconds, that's why I say it creates questions in your mind. Well, if it's a time is a time is a time. Why were good previously in my previous watch? Why were good numbers higher than what good numbers are now? So it does create a little bit of doubt. But the important thing there is, to your point, is relative to me as an individual. Um, and so, yes, we've got norms and standards, just like we do with anything else, and there are numbers that are considered healthy and numbers that are considered unhealthy. But we also have some genetic limitations within each individual that will have an impact on these kind of things. Hormones will play a role, etc. So yes, you need to track your numbers over time, and then you need to learn to recognize when the numbers are becoming unsustainable and that you need an intervention, extra rest days, pulling out intensity, laying off the alcohol. But one of the reasons why it's a great tool, Brad, is you'll actually pick up which foods that you eat close to bedtime actually impact your sleep negatively. So I would say that as a recovery tool, yes, it's good, and it gives us good um, feedback in terms of should we be backing off. But where it really, heart rate variability, where it's fantastic, is it gives you such a good idea of the quality of your sleep. Okay. So you can start tracking things like certain TV programs will have a negative impact on your stress and cause you to not sleep as well. Certain foods, certain activities close to bedtime will have a negative impact. Alcohol is just an easy one for me to use as an example. But if you have alcohol before going to sleep, there's a literal noticeable difference when you check your HRV from the day before. And I mean, there's a health insurer in South Africa now that's actually allowing members to buy the Aura Ring at a discounted price and in a work back scenario. So in other words, the medical insurer is going to buy that device, okay, and then track your sleep. And when you make good sleep decisions, you gets to keep the device for free, but every time you make really poor sleep decisions,
You got to pay for it.
they'll 100%. They'll obviously have an allowance of maybe how many nights a week you can have a bad night's sleep. I don't know exactly how it's going to work, but then at the end of the month, you'll pay back that month's portion of the ring if you haven't been looking after your sleep hygiene. So really, I feel like that's where HRV probably has its biggest use for people like you and me. The recovery stuff is useful. Use it, of course, but nothing helps recovery like sleep. So use it to fix your sleep.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, Lindsey, and this is a bit of a tangent from what we're talking about. But I've got a good friend who's got the Whoop. It's not it's the wristband one, and he's quite a. I think we've spoken about it on the podcast before. He's quite an analytical type of guy. So he loves these sort of like A/B tests, if you'd like. So he sorts of and I think with Whoop, I've never played with it, but I understand that you can almost track what you're eating, what you're drinking, like habits, and then you can go, okay, cool, I'm going to have 1 glass of wine before bed versus 2 glasses of wine. And then you can sort of like see how you react, or if red meat is better for you than chicken, as an example, like at dinner, or when you shouldn't eat, like those sorts of things. And these devices are great, but like I don't want to be wearing 17 different devices. I don't want to have to wear an Oura Ring and a Whoop and my Garmin watch. So one thing that I've found with Garmin, and yeah, is it's nice having that number, but and I know I didn't sleep well, but I also, was it the glass of wine I had at lunchtime, or was it the steak I had for dinner that's actually causing it? And I just feel there's something missing there on the Garmin side of things. And I've been playing around with a lot of AI tools, and I swear I'm going to build a dashboard and A/B test this thing so that I can figure out, like Whoop does, but using my Garmin data, so I don't have to wear another device. I'm sure I can figure it out. So that's a total aside. I think I'm going to do that. Maybe we'll get some feedback on the podcast, because I think there is something there.
Look, the universe is becoming so connected. So quite a few of these nutrition sites have APIs with your wearables. So you could probably, I mean, again, Whoop is great if it's got it integrated, and I'm not sure if Oura Ring does or not. And I'd say probably right now, in terms of if we have to combine ease of use and accuracy, Whoop and Oura Ring are probably at the moment the two that are at the top of that food chain. I know there was a when we were at the expo, geez, now almost a year ago, almost a year ago at an expo at a race, there was another brand that was brought in South Africa, and I did my due diligence. They're just as good, but the name escapes me now. So you've got these a couple of wearables they're certainly ahead of the watches, and they speak the same language. And I think that's, again, back to my original point, is like, if 50 is good, that should be good across all devices, because in theory, they should be measuring the same thing. Okay. And to that point, in fact, Brad, that's maybe we haven't spoken about that. So why is there this discrepancy? Is because none of these devices actually physically measure the interval in the electrical impulses in the heart. They all track blood flow, and from blood flow are making inferences about the change in the gap between those beats. So the only way you're ever going to be 100% accurate is with a direct measurement. And so a strap is always going to be the gold standard once you move out of the lab.
And a strap around the chest, not a strap around your wrist.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Because a strap around your wrist is going back to tracking blood flow. Okay. So I think that's an important thing we just forgot to bring in the introduction when you asked me about how it's measured. So that is key. But be that as it may, those are measured against stress ECG, which is proper tracking of the impulses. And so I think we can probably go with Whoop and Oura Ring and similar devices to them, that those are probably accurate enough. I feel like the watches have still got a little way to go. However, they do seem reliable enough and repeatable enough that as long as you just rely on one source. Okay.
Yeah.
So now back to where we were talking, it's nice that those Whoop, Aura, they have the integrated approach. It's easy. It's all in one place. But there are loads of apps, and the integration and APIs between all of these things are now in such a place that you could build yourself a little app and an API. So you could do it that way, or you could download one of these food apps and integrate, and then in the same way, A/B test things that are causing you the stress and things that are relieving the stress.
Yeah, I say my mate's a bit of an analytical data geek, but I think I'm mate to them because so am I. So I think that is, as much as I'm saying it's him, I get quite excited about those sorts of things too. So yeah, I think I'm going to play around with something like that. But Linz, does this mean, okay, we're talking HRV, does this mean resting heart rates out, HRVs in?
No, so I mean, HRV is obviously becoming more and more accessible. So now, if you can afford a watch, then you can afford HRV. But not everybody wants the top end watch. Not everybody can afford the top end watch. So heart rate is still relevant. It still gives us a good idea, and it's certainly simpler, and we can be a little bit more confident that the numbers are in fact what we are seeing. Having said that, a lot of the older wrist units are simply just not good enough for using heart rate either. But what is pretty darn good is using your finger. That gives you a damn good idea of what
if
the
you can count that high, which is what
yes,
I struggle with. So
yeah. If and you've got a watch that can at least tell you when 60 seconds are up. So with heart rate, there's a couple of things you can use. So resting heart rate works quite well. And then we know like fluctuations of 3 to 4 beats per second are fairly normal, and you wouldn't worry about that. I would say around about 10%. So I always used to talk in absolute numbers, Brad, and then I actually did presented with a sports doctor, and yeah, sometimes things are really obvious, and you kind of, for whatever reason, you just never think of them like that. But our resting heart rate in particular is quite unique to each of us, and so probably a percentage gain is better. So probably once you hit 10% or bigger gain in resting heart rate, there's an intervention that's required there, either backing off your training, cutting volume, but something you need to adjust something and acknowledge that something's happening. But then what's really great with heart rate is that you don't actually have to make a dedicated time. Oh, I'm going to take my resting heart rate now every morning when I wake up. No, you can also infer things during exercise. So if you are suddenly experiencing 10% higher, actually 10% probably doesn't work there. I must work out a new percentage. But literally, if you have a noticeable increase in your heart rate at easy training, you can be sure that something is amiss, and you might not want to do a hard session just in case you're getting sick, something along those lines. When you do your interval sessions, you can actually compare the slope of your recoveries. So if you are recovering really quickly, that's a good sign. If you've got a much flatter line in your recovery heart rate in your rest intervals than you normally do, that would be a sign that you are under stress. And then, of course, the big one is like when you do intervals and you actually can't get your heart rate up anymore. So if you used to seeing like 160s, 70s during your intervals, but now suddenly pushing out 140s, 150s, that's not normally a sign that you're getting fitter. That's normally a sign that you can't recruit muscle fibers because you are fatigued. So yeah, Brad, I think heart rate and standard heart rate is still a great tool. It's still relevant.
Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit about the research about heart rate variability and using it as a marker for like health, stress, training readiness. What is some of the research saying about it? If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsey and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, so just what I said near the beginning is that it's a really good marker for whether you are under stress, so that your excitatory neural system is in charge, or when you're in a more relaxed state where you've got a lower or your inhibitory system is more in command. So when you're under stress, high cortisol levels, then that's when we will have this low heart rate variability because there's dominance. And then when we're in balance, we have nice high heart rate variability, and that's what we want. If there's quite a lot of difference in those, that's cool. When we've got dominance of one or the other, that is very low. And then we know that we are in a stressful environment, because the two nervous systems are actually fighting each other for dominance so that we can calm the stress, but then the stress needs a response. So the research basically shows that it's very sensitive, it picks up changes very quickly, and that it's almost instant. So that's why, like, if you have a cup of coffee 10-15 minutes later, you'll see that there's a difference in your HRV. I've got a friend a bit like you that they do some beta testing, but not just on themselves, on their kids. So they now know, we know that sugar is not good for you, but they know without a doubt that if they give their children sugar, it's a problem. And so they also know the types of foods. And funny enough, for my friend, for example, he found that, like, sugar, as in sweets and chocolate, not so bad, but potato chips, massive problem for him. So the research shows that it's instant, and that the information that you get is repeatable and reliable. So it's a very helpful tool, Brad.
Does it become more helpful the older we get?
Look, the answer is yes. Okay, so the reason for my hesitation is because as a consumer, I'm not a good example. Like, I like to find patterns and then move on. Okay, so I think the weakness in something like this is that for someone like me, I would be very good for 2 weeks, and then I would go, I've got it waxed. And I don't know if that's because that's what I constantly have to do in every day, is to look at this stuff for other people, that for myself, it's just too tiring to track it ongoing for myself. And I often don't like the answer that I get. And by that, I don't mean that I get a bad answer. I mean, like, I will see a concept, a new concept, great research in it, and I'll go, that's the next answer for me. And then I'll try it, and I'll discover I'm already getting, that's the outcome I'm already getting. Okay. So I'm annoyingly healthy. Okay. So, and I've been running since I was 5 years old. So maybe I shouldn't be surprised that I've got an enormous aerobic base, but I'm constantly disappointed that this isn't the magic wand for Lindsey Perry. So to answer your question, it's only going to work if you like numbers, you like looking at numbers, and you like to keep track of them, because this is something you really need to look at over the long term. So I think the next step for these units and everything is to actually have some sort of alarm system. So I don't have to worry about it day to day, but when there's a change in my weekly average above a certain point, that I get a notification saying, hey, are you okay? And that's probably not a bad, when you build your app, Brad, it's not a bad little thing to have in there.
To include in there. All right, Lindsey, let's talk a little bit about the recovery side of it and using HRV as a tool when it comes to recovery. But I think if we take a step back on recovery, particularly for over 50s runners, why is recovery so critical for runners over the age of 50?
Well, that's where the research is so strong, Brad, is that with in the absence of recovery, there is no progress. So to have progress, we must recover from the efforts. When we train, and particularly when we're training hard, it is the systemic failure, it is the damage that we cause from the stress that we exert on ourselves, the organism. That stress has a response from us, and it's the response that makes us fitter and stronger and faster. But if we don't give ourselves the room for that response to be positive and to improve and fix and strengthen, then we start to beat ourselves into a hole and we get the opposite. So if we don't give the body the time for the response, we cannot improve. And in fact, 99% of the time, what it means, we don't even stagnate. We actually get worse because we can't even do the repair process from that stress, never mind the super compensation part of that process. And so that is quite literally why recovery is so important. And these tools give us a better idea of whether or not we are recovered.
Yeah, Lindsey, and it's not, I mean, when you talk about the training, we think physically, like it's just getting faster, getting stronger, and that sort of thing. But there's a whole bunch of physiological things that happen in our bodies that gets impacted when we do that, when we don't recover properly. And it's hormones, immune function, like higher injury risk, those sorts of things.
100%. That's why I use the word systemic failure, because yes, there's a physical failure too sometimes. So you actually physically just can't cope with the workload, and that's when you'll get mild discomfort in the muscles and the ligaments and the joints, and typically those are the overt signs of failure. And in the recovery process, your body will repair that damaged muscle, and it will repair it in a way that it's structurally stronger and functions better the next time you try and do exactly the same thing. But also, on a physiological level, there's this whole process of supplying energy and oxygen, in particular to the working muscles. There's this requirement of the human body that we shuttle heat. So one of our, the two biggest inhibitors of human performance are altitude and heat. So, and one of the reasons why humans evolved so well is because we have a unique ability to shunt heat, but we have to do it. And so when we train hard, that ability to both shift heat, because it's the same system, it's the circulatory system, it's the heart and the blood that are the primary drivers of both shuttling heat away from the working muscles to cool the core temperature down, but also to supply oxygen and energy to the muscles, and to remove all the byproducts of energy metabolism out and get the carbon dioxide out of the body into the atmosphere. So all of these things need to be improved. They all require energy to fix and improve. And so if we don't give the body the time in between training for that to happen, we're not going to get better.
Cool. So let's talk about how to use HRV to identify when we are at risk of either overtraining or under recovery before it becomes a problem. So using it as almost like an early warning system.
Yeah. So again, it's such a minuscule number, milliseconds. And again, guys, I'm going to give you some numbers now. But what's really important is that you go and read through the white paper for your unit. So if you go onto the website for whatever device you're using and you just click in a simple search, your watch will tell you. And then, of course, what is great about almost all these units is that they will have a robot system. Okay, so green, yellow, and red. And green is where you want to be. Yellow means that you are starting to get to a problem where you want to take notes, and red is a warning sign. Okay, so typically values in the 20s mean that you are under stress, okay, and that you really need to do something about it. So that would be, I would rate that as quite acute stress. You're not sleeping well, you're probably or consuming foods that are really not agreeing with you, and or completely overtrained. So I would, when you're in the 20s, got to do something about it. 30s to mid 40s, good. And obviously, the closer you are to the 30s, you want to keep an eye on it. So that's kind of how I treat it. In the 30s, you probably don't have to intervene, but you certainly need to just keep every morning keeping a track of it. As you get into those 40s, you're probably in a great state. And if you're in the upper 50s, I almost want to say you can probably push yourself a little bit harder. Of course, of course, you've got to be a bit careful with making statements like that. But that really means that you have got things sussed out, and that you could tinker with adding a bit more here and there. But don't go crazy, because you can quite quickly push yourself the other way.
All right, Lindsey, let's talk a little bit about how you should adapt your training when things aren't looking great with those HRV numbers. Like, what are some of the things we can do from a training perspective when we notice that trend dipping?
Yeah. So like that's it's such a good question, and that's something that has evolved over time in my mind. So for me, when you have the low HRV, I always just want to strip out intensity first. Now, it's probably still the right thing to do, solely because stripping, or let me rephrase that, when you are tired, you are at your highest risk for injuring yourself. And when you are tired, high intensity probably constitutes the biggest risk for getting injured. Anytime the load is very high, in fact, okay? So higher load, and we typically have higher loads during high intensity workouts, but we also have very high loads on our long runs, okay? So those two runs, long runs and high intensity, both constitute your big loads for the week. And so when you've got a low HRV, then that's what you want to tinker with. Now, this is an over 50 podcast. So I would actually, this is one area where I would treat it quite differently if I'm dealing with a young person or if I'm dealing with 50 plus. And that's because one of the important keys of training as we get older is the neuromuscular adaptation. So I'm not comfortable with stripping out intensity for long periods of time. I would much rather compromise on volume. Okay. So in this scenario, let's say you suddenly drop very low. Well, then it's easy, because we can still keep the intensity in the week, but we can push the intensity later in the week, and we can drop the volume of the intensity. And that is still important, because we want some stimulation, but we want to reduce the load. Okay.
Yeah. And if
So
I can jump in there, you did some sort of internal education, like a coach's education with our team of coaches in the last week and a bit. And one of the things I picked up in there was, when you were talking exactly about this, was using strides. So getting that neuromuscular sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Were you getting
stimulation, adaptation.
That's exactly what the word I was looking for. So you're getting that stimulation, but you're not having the extra load that's causing or putting added strain on the system.
Yeah. So exactly that. So that's still keeping intensity, but it's dropping the load of the intensity. Instead of going out and banging 6 times 1 kilometers, you can do 5 to 6 times 150 meters, and it's still going to provide the value for the neuromuscular adaptation, but it's going to remove the risk. Okay, so let's just talk about some immediate steps. Okay, I wake up, boom, I've got a very low HRV, slept terribly last night. Am I going to not train? No. I very seldom respond on one poor 24-hour window. Okay. But what I won't do is I won't go out and train hard. So I may still go out. Today's my day. And this is one of the kind of disadvantages, I guess, of being an amateur athlete, even a serious amateur athlete, is that often we can only train on certain days. So I don't want to waste today. So I'm going to go out. I'm going to make sure that I keep it easy, at most a couple of strides, and I'm not going to make it long. So I'm going to keep it under 45 minutes. Okay. So that's it. And then I'm going to check day 2 and day 3. Okay. So now, if it is staying low over a prolonged period, 72 hours or more, then you somehow didn't notice it coming down and you've managed to push yourself into overtraining. And that would require like a wholesale change to the plan. The next 2 weeks would need some adjustment so you could dig yourself in the hole. Okay. If it's because now actually you were sick, by 72 hours, you'll know that you're sick. And then you know, okay, that's it. I'm actually not going to do this. But in reality, if you're just a little bit out of sorts, if it's because you had a late function, if there's just, you'll just see that trend start to reverse. And by the weekend, you will probably be back to training, or this might happen on a weekend. So let me not say by the weekend, but within 3 to 4 days, you probably find you are back to a normal place. And you know, if it's only one day and the next day HRV is back to normal, well, great, because that just means you overreached a little bit, or there was a very stressful something, and we're resilient enough to not have to worry about that. Then we just carry on full steam ahead.
Yeah, Lindsey, I find it quite interesting too, because obviously you talk about it often that training is a stress on the body, but your body doesn't differentiate types of stress. Stress is stress. So whether it's work stress or family stress, financial stress, training stress, your body interprets it as stress, and that all has an impact on HRV. So are there some daily habits that you can put in place outside of, I mean, we've spoken about the training interventions, but what are some things that we can do to improve our HRV? I almost want to call it HRV hygiene. So to not put ourselves under undue stress that's going to impact the way we train.
So nutrition is a big one. Okay. So making sure that you're getting enough protein, and that you aren't consuming too many of your carbohydrates as simple sugars. Okay. So that's a very simple nutritional thing that you can look at straight away. And then, Brad, to our earlier conversation, is actually over weeks and months, you can actually learn what foods to avoid. And in this scenario, we just avoid those foods in the short term, and consume the foods that we know are going to be good for us, and then sleep. Like changing our sleeping habits and ensuring that we give ourselves the best chance of having a good night's sleep. So those are things like getting off screens 30 to 40 minutes before we go to bed at night. It's like reading a book that doesn't stimulate you. So whether it's watching TV or reading a book, don't read things that stimulate you. So I have to start avoiding reading my books at night when I'm getting into the final sort of quarter of the book, because you know, then it's someone's always fighting someone or rushing somewhere or chasing something. That's not the kind.
You just need to change the books you're reading, not what you're reading.
Or read different books before you go to bed. That's exactly the point there. Very cool, dark sleeping space. So don't have flashing lights, a TV with a red light, a cell phone next to you in the bedroom. So yeah, bit of sleep hygiene, looking after your nutrition, control the things you can control, because some of the stress we cannot control. And that's why we often modify the exercise, because it's the easiest thing to modify in our life. Mega pressure from your boss at work, that's not an easy one to modify. So you kind of, while you're under that pressure, you got to ride it out and adjust other things in your life to help you cope with that better.
Yeah, Lindsey, and then just to wrap things up, I think obviously we're talking about HRV and training and that sort of stuff, but I mean, we have a big focus on longevity and long-term health here at Coach Parry too. What's the sort of, are there links between HRV and living longer, more healthy life? Like what's the, are there any links there?
So I haven't, look, I'm going to guess that there is, but what I'm going to say is that I haven't seen that research. The research that I have seen is that there are mega long-term health benefits to improving your sleep. Okay. So that's on a congenital level. So just as we get older, mental clarity and acuity, there's a strong link between poor sleep hygiene and brain disease, for example. And there's just plenty studies to show higher mortality rates in people who don't sleep well. So I'm going to say that HRV is a really good tool to use to help you improve your sleep. And if you do that, you're going to help your short-term performance, but you're going to make a huge difference to your long-term health.
All right, cool. Then just finally, what's the first step for someone who's never tracked HRV or used HRV as a tool in their training? What's the first step that they can do today to start using it?
Now, just check if your device actually does it. So this is not, there isn't a simple way of doing this. You need a device that can measure it. And in this instance, often spending more money means you're going to get more accurate readings. So you need a top end GPS device or something like a Oura Ring to track it. And look, for sleep tracking, a belt is just not practical. Okay, even though most of the top end units do have heart rate belts that do a good job of HRV tracking. So, first step, get a device that you know is reliable and repeatable, and then spend the first 40 days of that purchase tracking the trends and learning about it. And after that point, you're going to have really good data that you can just have a simple check every morning and go, things are looking good. Whoa, I need to actually have a little bit of intervention. And then, Brad, we can jump into your mates and my mates who really like to tinker with things, and you can do A/B testing and figure out what things are best for you and what things are bad for you.
Yeah, watch the space. I'm going to figure something out. I'm going to turn that into a little dashboard. I think I'm going to figure it out on a weekend when I've got a few hours. I will definitely keep you updated here on the podcast. Lindsey, as always, thanks for your time today. Much appreciated. I love doing these deep dives, and we're back again next week with another edition of the Faster Beyond 50 podcast. If you haven't subscribed to this podcast yet, please do hit the subscribe button. If you wouldn't mind as well, if you've made it this far into the podcast, just leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening to, whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It really does help us get in front of other runners just like you as well, and we can share this message and help as many runners as we physically and humanly can. Until next time, from the two of us, it's cheers.